Warning. Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat involves the discussion of horror and suspense movies. These movies often include violent, frightening, and disturbing content. Also, we sometimes discuss ladies and their lovely physical attributes, and we sometimes discuss topics considered naughty to talk about in polite company. This program is intended for audiences over the age of 18. Viewer discretion is advised.
Oh, my stomach.
Fancy, we're going to have a hard time having a constructive work session if you're going to keep moaning like that. What's the matter with you anyway?
Oh, my stomach hurts and I don't feel so good.
What do you mean you don't feel so good?
It must have been something I ate.
What do you mean it was something you ate?
He bought a box of protein shake powder from Miss Guinevere. I think he drank it all at once to impress her.
Oh no, she's not supposed to be selling those things in the workplace. Fancy, you don't ever buy the protein shakes from Guinevere. Those things come from China and they're full of all kinds of toxic ingredients.
Guinevere told me it would activate my immune system.
Well, of course it activates your immune system. The active ingredients are mercury and radium. And it's basically 95% gypsum powder. Basically what you drank is watered down drywall mud.
It's the only way I can get her to pay any attention to me.
She's got you tied around her little finger.
But I love her so much.
Listen to me, Fancy. Guinevere is not going to go out with you. No matter how many protein shakes you buy from her, no matter how many anti-wrinkle creams you buy from her, she is not going to go out with you. You need to set your sights elsewhere.
But she's the only woman in the world for me.
Of course there's other fish in the sea. I mean, look right next to you. You got Ravina. Why don't you ask Ravina out?
I only date alpha males. Fancy is far too girly for my taste.
Ow! I felt that one all the way over here. Okay. All right, buddy. Listen, I'm going to go get you some Pepto. You guys get back to work, and we'll get going, okay?
Hello and welcome to Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, the place where we have some fun discussing horror movies. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, fans of horror movies can rejoice because October has officially arrived. Yes, we are into the spooky season now, leading up to Halloween in about 4 weeks. Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat is still a young show, and Season 1 ran back during the spring and summer, so this is our first ever spooky season. Over the next 4 weeks, we will exclusively review Halloween-themed movies, including a special episode next week where we will get you ready for the October 15th premiere of Halloween Kills. But for tonight, we have 2 movies that are great choices to watch during the Halloween season. They're both films that revolve around haunted houses, but they are 2 very different movies. We think you're going to enjoy them both, so let's get to it. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great time watching. Now, here we go.
Everyone grab your pencils and notebooks. It's time for Steve's vocabulary lesson.
All right, everybody, class is in session. Let's dig into this week's vocabulary lesson. We've got a difficult lesson this week. 4 words, 3 of them being German in origin, because sometimes the English language just isn't enough and you have to call in the Germans for reinforcement. So let's get into it. Word number 1. Smooshnoodling. This is a noun referring to the action of flattening, bursting, or squishing a character's noggin through the sudden application of a large mass or blunt object. Colloquial forms include melanchonking and Gallaghering. Word number 2, Musikentinkle. This refers to the action of a sudden sound being produced by an inanimate object that is not supposed to be able to make a sound, thus causing audience members to wet themselves. Word number 3, Clownikenenpoepen. This is a noun referring to the sudden movement of a clown doll that is supposed to be inanimate, which causes audience members to soil themselves. And finally, word number 4, Schottenpoepen. This is a noun referring to the biological action that occurs when a member of a film's audience suddenly notices a figure in the shadows who is not supposed to be there. Please keep these vocabulary words in mind. They will be important later in the episode. And that is Steve's vocabulary lesson for this week.
Before we get to our featured film reviews, please enjoy this episode of Monster Chat.
Hello, and welcome to Monster Chat. I am your host, Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus. In today's episode we will discuss demons. It is important to understand the distinction between ghosts and demons, as this is often a point of confusion. As we discussed last season, ghosts are the disembodied spirits of the deceased. Their inability to transition to the afterlife is a result of their involvement in one or more multi-level marketing schemes. Ghosts cannot pass on to the afterlife because they have not yet satisfied their contractual obligation to sell cosmetics, healthy herbal supplements, timeshare vacation residences, or dubious financial service products. Demons, on the other hand, are spirits that have never possessed a living body. Demons are the creators, owners, and managers of the multi-level marketing schemes that employ ghosts. In short, they are the bureaucracy of the spiritual realm. The importance of multi-level marketing schemes in the spiritual realm cannot be overstated. It is not a coincidence that many of mankind's oldest structures are pyramids, thus mimicking the shape of a multi-level marketing scheme. It was widely believed by Egyptian royalty that their construction of pyramids ensured an eternal supply of anti-wrinkle cream in the afterlife. There also are other important differences between ghosts and demons. For example, ghosts and ghostly infestations are restricted to a particular location. This is a result of the complex franchise agreements that govern the distribution of sales territories within multi-level marketing schemes. However, because they are management, demons are not restricted to a particular sales territory. Demons often center their attention on an individual instead of a particular location. The demon's intention is to steal the individual's soul, thus bringing the victim into its marketing pyramid and entitling it to 10% of the victim's earnings in perpetuity. If you are confronted by a demon, you should burn some sage. Burning sage is an effective defense against both ghosts and demons because the aroma of burned sage gives herbal supplements a bitter flavor and infuses anti-wrinkle creams with an unpleasant odor. The ghost or demon will flee the presence of burning sage in an effort to protect their product. In emergencies, pentagrams often can be used to capture demons and confine them to a specific location. The shape of the pentagram superimposes multiple marketing pyramids into a matrixed organizational structure, creating an infinite loop where everyone is in charge of everyone else simultaneously. This bureaucratically paralyzes the demon. The organizational structures employed at General Electric and the Ford Motor Company are loosely based upon this principle. This has been Monster Chat, hosted by Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus. Thank you for joining me.
And now it's time for our featured film reviews.
Let's get into our first featured film review for this evening. Our first film is titled Hellfest. There's the poster right there. This is a slasher movie of the mainstream college student variety. It was released in the year 2018, directed by Gregory Plotkin, and the cast includes Amy Forsyth, Rain Edwards, Bex Taylor-Klaus, and Tony Todd. And I will tell you right up front, Tony Todd does not actually have a huge role in this movie. He only really appears in one scene in the movie, but his voice is used throughout the movie. So let's set your expectations for Hellfest. What you should expect is a conventional slasher film that takes place in a horror theme park. The reason you should watch this is it's an above average, if predictable, slasher movie, and more to the point, we're into the Halloween season right now, and it's a seasonally appropriate slasher film. It's a pretty good choice for a Halloween party. If you're having some friends over, this is a pretty good one to put on during a Halloween party. If you like Scream or Final Destination, you might like this movie. It's very similar to Scream in terms of its vibe. So let's calibrate your expectations a little bit. Here's the chart that we like to use. On the far left side of the spectrum, we have very campy, very silly movies such as Sharknado or Jason X. Now, that is not to say that these are bad movies. This is not to say that they're poor quality. It's just to say that they are not intended to be taken seriously. On the far right, we have very serious movies such as The Silence of the Lambs. Hellfest falls fairly close to the middle, maybe just a hair to the right of the middle on this scale. It is a very sanitized mainstream release, so it is right down the middle, but it's not campy. It doesn't really have any joking in it. It doesn't have kind of the wink and a nod that you get with the Scream series. It's a little more bland than that, so I put it just to the right of the midpoint. Let's do a film summary for Hellfest. This is a mainstream, competent, big-budgeted, and respectably produced slasher film. In this film, good girl Natalie comes home from college and is invited out for a night of fun at Hellfest, a traveling horror theme park, which is hard to get into. But she's invited by her best friend Brooke and her frenemy Taylor. They never get entirely into the backstory of all these characters in the movie, but apparently all three of these girls went to school together, Brooke and Natalie being best friends. Natalie and Taylor not getting along so well, but at this point, now that Natalie has gone away to college, Brooke and Taylor are roommates together, and they have to learn to get along. And they do kind of start to bond as the evening goes on. At the park, the ladies meet up with Brooke and Taylor's boyfriends, plus good guy Gavin, who is interested in Natalie, and more to the point, Gavin is able to get them VIP passes to Hellfest. As the group makes its way through the various themed areas of Hellfest, they are stalked by a mysterious masked man that we will talk more about in a moment. The masked man is killing park patrons for real, using the park's horror atmosphere as cover. So you've got a horror theme park where you have haunt actors running around, portraying serial killers, pretending to stab people, popping out and scaring people. And it's making perfect cover for this guy to do his thing for real without anybody noticing what he's doing. The masked man slowly separates the members of the group and begins picking them off one by one in a game of cat and mouse. Alright, let's get into the villain profile for our movie Hellfest. The villain for this film, we're just going to refer to him as the Other. They don't actually give him a name in this film. If you watch the film, you'll understand why he's called the Other. I can't really unpack that anymore for you without giving away a spoiler, so just take my word for it that he is referred to as the Other. There you see him in his creepy mask and hoodie. He is of the slasher serial killer class, and his special powers are, well, nothing other than his ability to blend into the surroundings, which he uses very, very effectively in this film, and it makes him very dangerous. Signature weapons for the Other, well, he uses various signature weapons, including a keyhole saw, a syringe, and a great big hammer. Now, some people who have watched this film may say, hey, what are you talking about, Steve? He uses a knife. No, he does not use a knife, he uses a keyhole saw. If you are not familiar with home improvement, or you're not a skilled tradesman and you're not familiar with a keyhole saw, it looks a lot like a knife, but it's actually a saw blade. It is thicker than a conventional saw blade, has a sharp point, and is designed to be able to be stabbed through drywall and then sawed back and forth in order to make a cut through drywall. It's also good for cutting other things such as, for example, pumpkins. So keyhole saw is a really convenient tool to have for pumpkin carving, which is how it makes its way into this film. So yes, the other does make good use of a keyhole saw in this film. Now, as far as signature techniques go, he doesn't really have a signature technique unless you consider straight up stabbing somebody a signature, and we'll talk about this more in a minute. This is really one of the weaknesses of the film, and this is not a bad film, and he's not a bad villain. It's just, it's not as memorable as it should be. He doesn't really have a signature technique. There's really no signature moments as far as kills. There's just, the movie didn't really go the extra mile to make itself memorable, and it ends up feeling a little bland, and you end up feeling a little underwhelmed because of that. But that is our villain profile. Steve did like some things about this movie. It is respectable. Let me say that again. It has a respectable budget and good production values and looks good on screen. So there's a lot of horror movies that you catch on streaming services that just visually look terrible. They're too dark. There's too many dark filters. There's just poor lighting. You just can't necessarily tell what's going on. This movie has none of those problems. This looks like a competently made motion picture intended for big screen release. It has respectable, if not earth-shattering, acting. The cast in this is perfectly fine. Nobody's going to win an Academy Award, but nobody was written a role that was worthy of an Academy Award. I mean, Meryl Streep could not have made these roles, any more real than the actors that were used in this movie. It is reasonably well paced. It tells the story well without rushing or dragging. It gets to the point. It keeps the action moving. At no point do you say, okay, this is boring. When are we going to get to the interesting part? At no point do you say, hey, things are coming at me too fast. New or casual horror fans, at least, may jump a few times. There are some jump scares in here. Throughout the movie, they're going through horror-themed mazes and haunted houses, and of course, those are chock full of jump scares. It is a good choice for October viewing because costumes and haunts are woven into the fabric of your everyday life, whether you like it or not. Even if you're not the kind of person who's really into Halloween, and you're not the kind of person that's going to go to haunts or a pumpkin patch, just as you're driving around town as part of your everyday life, you're going to see spirit Halloween stores popping up, you're going to see pumpkin patches, you're going to see signs for haunted houses. So the fabric of your real life and this movie start to kind of tie together. So this is a really good movie to watch in October. Again, if you're having friends over and putting a movie on for a Halloween type party, this is a pretty good choice. You get a cameo appearance by Tony Todd, and like I said, he only makes one appearance in the movie, but his voice does appear throughout the movie. Now, there are a number of things that could have been better with this film, and I'm going to hit you with the bottom line right up front. It is formulaic and predictable, and now we're going to go through about a half dozen different bullets that expand on that. It's a mainstream studio release that the studio execs obviously were concerned about making accessible to teenagers who aren't regular horror fans, and I was tempted to say this film was intended for teenage girls, but I didn't say that because that's insulting to teenage girls. I would say this film feels like it was made by a bunch of 60-year-old grandfathers making a movie that they thought would appeal to their teenage girls, regardless of what the teenage girls might actually enjoy. It feels like a very sanitized, corporatized horror movie. The characters feel very one-dimensional, so they all seem familiar on the one hand, and on the other hand, you don't feel like you know much about them. On the other hand, you don't feel like you really need to know any more about them than what you already know. It's frankly too predictable to be very scary or suspenseful for a seasoned horror fan. Now, that's not to say it's a bad movie. That's not to say you won't enjoy it. But it is a stark contrast to our second feature film that we're going to discuss later, House LLC. That movie is just scary for everybody. It's just scary here, there, and everywhere. There's probably not a lot that's going to scare a veteran horror movie fan in Hellfest. Ultimately, the studio played things much too safe and apparently tried to make a film that appeals to too many different people when they put Hellfest together. So let's get to Steve's scorecard for Hellfest. Kills 6, and I've made a note here that the movie miscounts. At the end of the movie, somebody is driving home, and on the radio, they're listening to the news report about what happened at Hellfest, and the kill total they give on the radio is wrong. And at first I thought, I must have messed up when I was keeping score, but no, I went back through, and sure enough, my count is correct and the movie's count is incorrect. So I'm going to chalk that up to saying it's the fog of war and law enforcement had still not found all of the bodies because they missed one. Bare breasts, none. Like I said, sanitized, corporatized movie. Car chases, none. Denogginings, there is one plus 2 teases. Smoosh-noodlings, there is one, and I've also counted that as a denoggening, so basically you have a denoggening by smoosh-noodling in this movie. Douchey boyfriends, I have scored that as 2 of the 3. On the one hand, they're a little too one-dimensional to really be intensely douchey, but on the other hand, they were clearly intended to be douchey boyfriends, so I went ahead and rounded up and gave them credit. So 2 douchey boyfriends. And soy-based boyfriends, 1. Poor Gavin, not an alpha male. He's a soy boy. On the other hand, Natalie seems to like him a lot, so good for him, I suppose. With your viewing of Hellfest, you also get some bonus features. You get the ubiquitous Bex Taylor Kloss. Now, maybe this has more to do with my viewing habits than anything else, but it has seemed like for a while now, Bex Taylor Kloss has been just in everything I ever see when I turn on my television. You probably know her from Arrow. You know her from the Scream TV series, not the movies, but the Scream TV series, which, by the way, if you have not watched, it's actually pretty good. She was the voice of one of the characters on Netflix's Voltron reboot. So even if you don't know her, you know her voice. You'll recognize it. But she's also pretty distinctive looking, so you'll probably recognize her as well. You get a Brundlefly reference, a reference to the old David Cronenberg remake of The Fly from back in the 1980s, and it's probably the most unrealistic thing about this movie is the idea that a bunch of college students in 2018 would have heard of that movie, much less be able to make a Brundlefly reference. But for those of us who are hardcore horror fans, it's a good chuckle. You get the world's most embarrassing performance at a carnival game. Like I said, poor Gavin, he's a soy boy. He is not so much with the ring toss and throwing the baseballs at the milk bottles. And you get the Father of the Year award winner, and that will make sense when you watch the movie. So let's get to Steve's final score for Hellfest. We're going to give this 2 paws out of 4. It's an inoffensive but ultimately uninspiring mainstream slasher film. It's a decent choice for new and casual horror fans. Longtime fans might say meh. Now, I want to go a little more in detail on that. This movie was clearly intended to be the start of a franchise, and from what I've read about it, that is literally true. The studio went into this intending for this to be the first movie in a franchise of horror movies. And I don't talk much about my day job in this job, and I'm not going to talk about it now other than to say I have spent a lot of years in corporate America working for very large corporations, and so I can understand exactly what happened. I can envision a bunch of studio execs in a conference room with a couple of marketing people standing up at the front, showing a 3x3 grid breaking down all the key demographics of all the different people they're trying to appeal to with this movie and how they're going to appeal to all of them. Then maybe they put up what they call a composite character, one person who represents their target audience. Oh, this is Barbara. She's a 19-year-old sociology major, and she is our target audience for this movie. Barbara owns a Yorkie poo that's 2 years old that was a rescue. She likes Taylor Swift, and when she really feels naughty, she likes to listen to Fall Out Boy. Yes, I have sat through lots of that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is real, and the scent of that is all over this movie. They were clearly so concerned with trying to make this appeal to the most people possible, they ended up with Vanilla Ice Cream. And again, this is not a bad movie. Vanilla Ice Cream is very good, but most people enjoy Vanilla Ice Cream with other things, not just by itself. So if you're getting together with some friends and one or more of them not really a horror movie fan or not sold on the idea of watching a horror movie, this is a good choice. If you're throwing a Halloween party and you're doing Halloween-themed movies, this is definitely a good one to put into the mix. I have watched this movie several times, so obviously I don't consider it a bad movie. I've enjoyed it enough to watch it more than once, and not just because I'm reviewing it for this show. It's not as it's not a memorable movie, I think is its biggest crime. If you look back through the scorecard, there's really no memorable kills. There's no memorable characteristics for the featured killer. There's no memorable scares. There's nothing in this movie that sticks with you like the alien chest burster scene in the original Alien, or Hannibal Lecter on top of the elevator, or anything like that. Those scenes that just stick with you. It doesn't have any of that, and it's a good movie. Could have been a much better movie. It just feels like it was a wasted opportunity, but still worth watching. Definitely a good movie for a Halloween party. 2 paws out of 4. So that's Steve's final score for Hellfest.
And now a word from our delightful benefactors at PBDCtv, your nightly heartbeat of horror.
This is Mikey from Out of the Ordinary, and you're watching PBDCtv.
Oh, hi! First thing in the morning, when I'm listening to music and getting a little bit of time for some creepy research, I'm always representing with my PBDC merch. What a better way to have a cup of coffee in the morning.
Don't forget to check out our other cool merch at rootsbleedred.com. That's rootsbleedred.com.
This is Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus from Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, and when I'm not hosting Monster Chat or knocking down small Japanese cities, I'm watching PBDC TV. Now back to the show.
So let's get into our second featured film review for this week. The film is House LLC. Now we're going to be talking about the original version of this movie. There is also a director's cut available. At the time I'm recording this episode, both versions are available for free with ads on Tubi. If you've not seen this movie, I'm going to recommend that you watch the original version first, then you can go back and watch the director's cut. They're not that different, but I'm going to recommend that you start out with the theatrical release. There's the poster right there. This is a found footage mockumentary of the paranormal and supernatural variety. It was released in the year 2015, directed by Stephen Cognetti, and the cast includes Ryan Jennifer, who now goes by Ryan Jennifer Jones, Danny Bellini, Gore Abrams, Jared Hacker, Adam Schneider, and Alice Balke. So let's get into setting expectations for House LLC. So coming into this movie, what you should expect is a found footage mockumentary about events leading up to the disastrous opening night tragedy at a haunted house in rural upstate New York. Why you should watch this film? Well, I'm not going to lie. This is one of the best paranormal found footage films ever made, and I mean that literally. That is not an exaggeration. This is up there with Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch Project, whatever your favorite may be. This is a fantastic film. If you like Paranormal Activity, The Conjuring, The Blair Witch Project, you should like House LLC, and I would put this movie on par with any of those in terms of quality. It is an excellent, excellent film. As far as calibrating your expectations, here's the scale we tend to use. On the far left, we have very campy movies like Sharknado and Jason X. On the far right, we have very serious movies like The Silence of the Lambs. House LLC is right over there on the far right. It is a very, very serious film. It's not campy. There's no breaking of the fourth wall. There are no jokes. It is very serious, and it is very, very frightening. So let's get into a summary of House LLC. This is a found footage mockumentary that documents the events surrounding the setup of a haunted house and the tragic events that occurred on opening night. The film follows a documentary film crew who are investigating the Hell House tragedy, which had happened 5 years earlier. So the film was released in 2015. It's a fictional mockumentary about a mockumentary that was being made in 2014 about a fictional event that happened in the year 2009. Because of a near-total media blackout orchestrated by the local government, very little is known about exactly what happened at Hell House or why. So in 2009, you had some sort of tragedy happen on opening night at a haunted house called House LLC. And according to the film, 15 people died. It was blamed on a malfunction, but the city officials never really give a straight answer or a consistent answer on exactly what malfunctioned, exactly what happened, exactly why the people died. It is all very mysterious, which of course just leads to people asking more questions. The documentary crew is contacted by Sarah Havel, one of the members of the Hell House team who had been missing for 5 years, and you see her in the poster there. She is the one person who does not have her face scratched out. Sarah provides the crew with a collection of videotapes shot by the Hell House team, and they document events up to and including opening night. And just as a summary, this is a very, very scary film. There's really no villain profile for this film. It's paranormal, supernatural, and there's really no villain for us to profile, so we're just going to jump straight into things Steve liked about this film. It is well acted with believable characters. It does a good job of balancing the feel of watching an actual documentary where you have interviews of members of the media and so on, and going through an assortment of found footage tapes. So a lot of the movie is going through the found footage tapes being provided by Sarah Havel, but when you get to certain key milestones in those tapes, they will break away and take you back to the documentary film crew, and you'll get some input from a local historian or a local journalist that kind of reemphasizes or expounds upon a point you've just seen. So it does a really good job of balancing documentary and just found footage exploration. It gets interesting quickly. A lot of found footage movies struggle with just being a lot of bantering and padding up front and just a little bit of action at the end. This film does not have that problem. It has just the right balance. There's enough character development and bantering at the beginning of the film to get you interested in the characters, to let you know who they are, to make you care about them a little bit. But it doesn't need an hour before anything interesting happens. It starts getting spooky pretty early in the film. It has a very creepy atmosphere. It has almost non-stop suspense and scares. The film will have you jumping at every shadow. The film finds a way to hit you with every little thing that terrified you as a kid, like dolls that seem to move on their own, unexplained sounds, figures that seem to appear out of the corner of your eye in the shadows, but then vanish when you look at them head on. There's one scene in this that kind of involves hiding under a blanket. You know how when you were a kid and you were afraid of something, you would hide under a blanket, but then while you're under there, you're thinking, how do I know when it's safe to come out? Well, keep all that in mind, because there's a scene that plays on that whole sequence from your childhood in this movie. Even if you are a veteran of horror movies, something in this film is going to get to you. That said, the film is not perfect, but I'm going to tell you right up front, there is very little to criticize about this film. I recommend this film highly. I really, really like it. I have watched it several times. I enjoy it every time. I find something new every time. Something about it scares me every time. Just to give you an idea of how much I enjoyed this movie, I watched the original theatrical release of this film, put the slides together for this episode of the show, and immediately went back and watched the director's cut the same day, watched the two films back to back, in part because I just wanted to see what was different between the two, which isn't very much when you get down to it. But I just enjoyed the film so much that I had no problem sitting down and watching the whole thing from start to finish a second time on the same day. That said, the ending is chaotic. Now, that is intentional. They're trying to give the chaotic feel of being in a real haunt, but some may find it too confusing. If you have ever been in an actual life or death situation, like a natural disaster, or a fire, or a mass shooting, or something of that variety, you know what that chaotic feeling is like, and this movie does a good job of really driving that feeling home. That can be kind of unpleasant. Having lived through that sort of thing myself, it's not necessarily a feeling you enjoy. It's preference. Let the buyer be aware that the ending is just a little bit chaotic. There is excessive use of moving point of view cameras at the end of the film, and the images are bouncing around crazily because the camera operators are running. Now, again, that's intentional. It's a found footage movie. If all the movie was cameras that were stabilized on gimbals, you'd know it was fake. So the fact that these cameras are bouncing around as people are running around is kind of part of the atmosphere of the film. But I just, maybe it's because I'm getting old, but I just found it visually a little too hard to watch sometimes. And I don't mean too hard to watch in terms of too scary or too intense, just too difficult in terms of the fact that it gives me a headache and I was just having too much trouble focusing on the screen. The end of the film uses what feels like an excessive amount of video camera glitches to aid or possibly conceal special effects shots. Now, this is not a special effects movie, and it does not need to be. This movie does a fantastic job with suspense and scares and making you jump at things in the shadows. So it's not a movie with a $100 million special effects budget, so they're going to have to throw in some of the stereotypical camera glitches to conceal things. So I understand why they do it, and I guess I'm willing to accept that they have to do it. It's just one of those things that it gets so overused in some movies that I just hate seeing it at all. These are minor criticisms, though. Overall, the film is outstanding. Again, recommend that you watch this movie. It is fantastic. If you have not seen it, it is a perfect Halloween movie to sit down and watch late one night. Turn out the lights when you do. It's just great. So let's get to Steve's scorecard for House LLC. Kills, I'm calling it 7. According to the film, 15 people died at the Hell House tragedy, but because this is all found footage and people carrying cameras, and really the only footage of what happened inside is the cameras people are carrying as they're running around, you don't necessarily get a fully framed shot of all the kills, so you don't see all of them. You may see more than 7. I counted 7 when I watched this, but like I said, you see something new every time you watch this movie, but I'm going to call it 7. Bare breasts, there are none. Although there is an actress who is part of the haunt who is in her bra and panties, and you get a long, lovingly panned and framed view of Ryan Jennifer's hindquarters. Car chases, none. It's not that kind of film. Denogginings. There are no denogginings, but there is one partial, it's more of a Pez dispensering, but at the end of the film you do have one almost denoggining. Musikentinkels. Yes, there will be times when you wet yourself because things make sounds that aren't supposed to. In fact, I counted 3 of them. Clownikenenpoopens. Yes, you will soil yourself several times because clowns that are not supposed to be able to move suddenly move. I counted 3 of those. And Schattenpoopen. That's when you look and see something in the shadows that's not supposed to be there. I counted at least 6. You can watch this movie over and over again and probably catch new stuff every time, but I counted at least 6. This movie is just full of things that will spook you and scare you. It's just terrific. You also get some bonus features with House LLC. You get clowns, clowns, and more clowns. These people know what is scary, and the interior of this haunt is full of clowns. Yes, hotels are supposed to have Bibles. No, they're not supposed to all be in the basement. One member of the team points that out. The rest of the team should have listened. All these signs and curses of cult activity aren't a bug, they're a feature. Half our work is already done. Yes, that is the attitude of the owner of House LLC. They're setting up a haunt in an abandoned hotel. There's clearly signs of cult activity, and he sees that as, hey, they've already left props for us. Yeah. If your gut says get out, trust your gut, and this movie will make that point. And finally, you get Ryan Jennifer's lovely hindquarters. We're not doing themed episodes in Season 2 of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, so we're not doing Scream Queen tributes, but we do just want to pay a quick tribute to the lovely Ryan Jennifer. Thank you for House LLC, Ryan Jennifer. We love you. So Steve's final score for House LLC. We're going to give it 3.5 paws out of 4. If you wanted to give this 4 paws, I would not argue with you. I knocked it down half a paw just because the ending is a little bit headache-inducing with all the cameras bouncing around. But overall, this is quite possibly one of the finest paranormal found footage films you will ever see. It chooses to be scary instead of excessively graphic and provides non-stop tension and scares. It will have you jumping at every shadow. Now, there is a sequel to this film called Hell House 2, The Abaddon Hotel. I have seen that. It's okay. It's in fact, I thought it was pretty good. It is not nearly as good as the original. The original mainly just shows you what happened and gives you a little bit of hints as to why things might be happening, but it doesn't really solve the mystery for you. Hell House 2 gets into more explaining the why behind things happen, and in a way it kind of takes some of the mystery out of it, so it's not going to be able to be as good as the second film. There is also a third film in the series, Hell House 3, Lake of Fire. I have not seen that one, so I can't really speak to it, but I definitely recommend House LLC. And again, if you're watching on streaming services, you may see that they have both the theatrical release and the director's cut. Having watched them back to back, I do see differences, but they're not gigantic. Either one of them is very good. If you want to take my advice, I would watch the original theatrical release first, and then if you like the movie, which I bet you will, go back and watch the director's cut just to see what's different. But really, it's just a couple of scenes that are in different orders. There's a couple of scenes that are included that did not make it into the theatrical release, but not enough to really radically change the film. Either one of them's good. I recommend House LLC highly. So that's Steve's final score for House LLC. We're almost to the end of another episode, but before we go, it is once again time to talk about other stuff Steve watched this week. Number 1, Screamers. Now we're talking about the 2018 movie that's technically #Screamers. There have been other movies with this title. We're not talking about, for example, the old Peter Weller sci-fi movie about giant robots, or excuse me, not necessarily giant robots, but killer robots that live underneath the sand. This is a 2018 found footage movie. In this film, a social media internet startup begins airing popular scare videos from an anonymous source. So imagine a startup who wants to be kind of a YouTube competitor. As they investigate the films more closely, they begin to suspect that these staged scare videos may not be staged, and it's kind of a point of disagreement within the management of the company. On the one hand, there's one guy who thinks these are great, that they're going to get them lots of clicks, and he wants to lock this creator up to an exclusive contract. Other people are not so sure this is fake and are worried about the implications for the company if it turns out that they're airing these things and it turns out that the crimes taking place are real. So they have to investigate this more closely, and it gets more and more scary and horrifying as they dig into it. This is an above-average film with a slightly incoherent ending, or maybe it's just a muddled ending, or maybe it was just late at night and I was too tired, but the ending seemed to fall apart for me a little bit. But overall, I would recommend this one. If you enjoy found footage films, I would say you're going to enjoy Screamers. Number 2, Jerusalem, and that's with a capital Z in the middle. And yeah, you can probably guess what that means, but we'll get to that. Best friend college students Sarah and Rachel fly to Israel for vacation, planning for a fun time in Tel Aviv with a little bit of a stop in Jerusalem while they're there. They meet a young archaeologist on the plane on the flight out there and hit it off and decide to make a detour and start their trip off in Jerusalem and spend a little more time there than they had planned originally. And of course they get there just in time for the city to be locked down, to find themselves caught in a zombie outbreak. Or maybe it's not a zombie outbreak. Maybe a portal to hell has been opened and these are the end times. This is a mediocre found footage movie. I would cautiously recommend it if you enjoy found footage movies. If you're not a fan of found footage movies, you probably won't like this one. It's not that incredibly exciting at the end of the day, and it's not that innovative. But if you are the kind of person who enjoys a good found footage movie just to kind of stream in the evenings, you can do worse than Jerusalem. Third movie for today is Man-Thing. In this film, a Louisiana sheriff investigates a series of bizarre deaths related to an oil drilling operation located deep in the swamp, and yes, becomes involved in a mythical creature named Man-Thing. This, of course, is based upon the Marvel comic character Man-Thing. Now, this movie is from 2005, so it predates the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is one of the Avi Arad movies from the end of his tenure at Marvel. So right before Marvel movies became good. It's an Australian film. You will recognize one face from this, possibly if you're a Marvel fan. You might recognize Rachel Taylor, who played Patsy Walker in the Marvel Jessica Jones series on Netflix. This is much earlier, so she's much younger, and she's trying to do some sort of Americanized Bayou accent, and it's kind of painful. No. Avoid this movie at all costs. Do not be fooled by the fact that it is a Marvel movie. It's a Marvel movie in the same way that that Fantastic Four movie that Roger Corman did and was never released was a Marvel movie. This one's just painful. You might be able to enjoy this if you're one of those people who can enjoy watching a painful movie ironically, which, I don't know, maybe that's what they were going after with this one. But that's the only way you're going to enjoy this. If you're the kind of people that have friends over and you play drinking games and just have a hoot watching really bad movies, you might have fun with this one. Otherwise, stay away from Man-Thing. So, cautious thumbs up to Screamers and Jerusalem. Definite thumbs down to Man-Thing. Let the buyer beware if you decide to watch Man-Thing anyway. But that is other stuff Steve watched this week. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Thank you so much for joining us. We had a great time putting this show together, and we hope you enjoyed it. Now, if you did enjoy the show, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and follow. You can find us on Facebook at Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, and yes, that's Tales with an A-I-L-S. Also, please remember to check out all of my friends and their great programming on PBDCtv. Whether you're interested in horror, true crime, weird history, or unexplained events, we're sure to have something for you. And PBDCtv is easy to find. We're on the World Wide Web at PBDCtv.com, and we're on YouTube at PsychoBunnyDC. We've also got a large presence on Facebook. You can find the mothership at PBDCtv, Or you can go directly to dedicated pages for channels such as Psycho Bunny Death Cult, Psychomanium 13, and Roots Bleed Red. Each channel has a little bit of a different atmosphere, but they're all part of the PBDCtv collective. We'll be back next week with a special episode to get you ready for the premiere of Halloween Kills, and I am so excited. I have been looking forward to that for so long. But we've got a week to go, so in the meantime, thank you once again for joining us. Everyone stay safe and have a great week. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye, everyone.